Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our sneak peek edition of Brothers War spoilers. So Brothers War, the next upcoming standard set, or premier set as they call them these days, not coming out until the beginning/middle of November. We actually don't go into full spoiler season until the end of October, so we still got like a month to go. But today Wizards dropped a ton of news and some amazing spoilers from the set on us. So we're gonna break them down and talk about our first look at Brothers War. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. Number one, if you need some Brothers War, you can get it from our awesome sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. And number two, if you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout spoiler season, you should mosey on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's take a first look at Brothers War. So first up, we're gonna look at one of the key characters from the set. One of the brothers, Urza, is Urza Lord Protector. And I'll warn you, at first this card doesn't make a lot of sense, but bear with me because good lord does this card get absurd. So Urza is a 3-mana Azorius 2/4 legendary human artificer. It says artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and then you can pay 7 mana, and if you both own and control Urza and an artifact named the Mightstone and the Weakstone, exile them and meld them into Urza Planeswalker. Activate this only as a sorcery. So if you don't know Meld, it's a mechanic we've only seen once before. Basically, it's 2 cards, and if you meld them, you put them together and they become 1 card. Actually, the back sides of the 2 cards like line up with each other and they become like 1 massive card. So this is the first return to Meld we've seen. So Urza at first, it's essentially like a Goblin Electromancer mixed with an Ethereum Sculptor, a little bit of ramping, but that's not what makes this card exciting. The exciting part is getting on the battlefield with the Mightstone and the Weakstone. So the Mightstone and the Weakstone, this is the artifact that Urza needs to become a Planeswalker. It's not super strong. It's a 5-mana legendary artifact Power Stone. When it ETBs, you get to choose to either draw 2 cards or give a creature -5/-5 until end of turn. And then you can tap it to add 2 generic mana, except it's Power Stone mana, so you can't spend it on non-artifact spells. You can't use it to use Urza's ability, though. So the Mightstone and the Weakstone's like an Ob Nixilis's Cruelty with a Divination, and then it makes 2 Power Stones, which we've seen with Card Living Legacy. Not super good, although we do know Brothers War is going to be super artifact heavy, so ramping for artifacts or abilities might get better. But this is not the big deal about these cards. The big deal is, let's say you play Urza on turn 3, you follow it up using its ramp ability to Mightstone and Weakstone on turn 4, and then you kill something, and then the next turn you use your Mightstone and Weakstone mana and your lands to meld Urza and Mightstone and the Weakstone. You get Urza Planeswalker, and this card is absolutely ridiculous. It is the first ever Planeswalker with 5 or 6 abilities, depending on if you count its static ability. So let's just read this card. It comes in with 7 loyalty. It says you can activate its loyalty abilities twice each turn rather than once, plus 2 artifacts, instants, and sorcery spells. You cast this turn, cost 2 less to cast, and you gain 2 life. Draw 2 cards and discard a card for its +1. Its 0 is make 2 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, -3 exile a non-land permanent, -10 artifacts and planeswalkers you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and then destroy all non-land permanents. Wow, it takes a lot of work to get here. You gotta jump through some hoops. It's a Planeswalker that requires you to have 2 different cards and meld them together, but if you get to Urza, it is a ridiculous Planeswalker. Its +2 is like double Urza Lord Protector. Its +1 is like Catalog, then you get double Raise the Alarm if you want to, Utter End, a Plague Wind almost, by making your stuff indestructible. This card's ridiculous, and you can activate it twice in each turn. So this means if you get your Urza, you can double +2 and then ultimate the next turn, or double -3 and exile 2 things, or make 4 1/1 soldiers, or some combination that draws some cards, makes some soldiers, whatever you want to do. If you get to this card and it doesn't die, your opponent doesn't have just some removal spell that kills it, it is probably going to win you the game. It is a ridiculous wall of text and an absolutely absurd card. The question is going to be, can you get to it? We've never really seen the meld mechanic traditionally be super constructed playable. Is this going to be like a real thing you can do in constructed, or is this going to be more of an against the odds deck? Being meld makes me a little skeptical, like having to draw 2 specific cards. That is a concern here. You got to do 2 things, and honestly, neither Urza or the Mightstone are like super powerful unless you're melding them into Urza Planeswalker. Maybe that's going to be fine though, because the reward is there and they do work well together. The fact that Urza reduces the cost on the Mightstone and Weakstone so you can get it down a turn earlier, and then Mightstone and Weakstone adds mana that you can use to pay for Urza's ability to meld them together into Planeswalker form. They do synergize nicely. Like when things go well, you can have Urza Planeswalker on turn 5. Turn 3 Urza, turn 4 Mightstone and Weakstone, turn 5 meld them together, get this absurd Planeswalker. So 2 other quick things on Urza. As far as standard is concerned, it is worth pointing out that it does work really well with Power Stones. We've kind of mocked Card Living Legacy a little bit for its Power Stones not being very good. And we know that Power Stones are a big mechanic in the set. Like the Mightstone and the Weakstone itself is a Power Stone. Normally, mana that can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells, so only cast artifacts or activates abilities, it just hasn't really been good in current standard. But that might be changing. Like, look at Urza in the Mightstone and the Weakstone and the Meld ability. Really, if you make a bunch of Power Stones, all you need is 3 real mana, because you can cast the Mightstone and the Weakstone with Power Stones, and then you can pay the entire Meld ability with Weak Stones. So it might be that this ability is a little cheaper than it looks if Power Stones are all over the place in standard. As far as Commander is concerned, it's worth pointing out that you don't really need to turn Urza into a Planeswalker to make it good. I think this is pretty much a combo commander. There's a lot of combos with Ethereum Sculptor, reducing the cost on artifacts, and now you essentially got an Ethereum Sculptor that's starting in your command zone, which makes it way easier to assemble the combos. You already got 1 piece for free as your commander, so probably the easiest combo is just Sensei's Divining Top, a cost reduction effect, which is Urza in this case, and then a way to play cards off the top of your library, and that lets you activate top to draw a card, and then put top on top of your library, but then you can cast it for free with a cost reduction thanks to Urza, so then you do it again. So essentially, if you get this set up, Sensei's Divining Top, Urza, in any way to cast stuff off the top of your deck, you just get to draw your entire deck. So I think that Urza, even if you don't really plan on melding it, or that's just like your backup plan, is probably going to be a pretty popular commander, or at least a pretty strong commander, because it works as a combo piece out of your command zone. We also got a new mythic artifact, Surge Engine, a 2-mana 3/2 defender. This says pay a blue, it loses a defender and gains this creature can't be blocked. Then you can pay 2 and a blue, and it becomes blue and has base power and toughness of 5/4. But you can only do this if you already activated the first mode, and then once you're a 5/4 unblockable, you can pay 6 mana, including 2 blue, to draw 3 cards, but only do this one time. Surge Engine, it might not look like much, but I actually think this is a pretty powerful card. If you really think about how this works, a 2-mana 3/2 defender, that's not very good. But if you pay 1 blue mana, you essentially have a 3-mana 3/2 unblockable. That's actually not bad at all. That's pretty efficient for being unblockable. And then, if you pay 3 more mana, so 6 total mana, you have a 5/4 unblockable, and then later you can pay 6 mana and draw a bunch of cards. So I think that if you add all this together, this is definitely a pretty powerful figure of Destiny, or a Valve Sleeper, or Warden of the First Degree. The twist is, it is 2 mana to get going, which that is a bit of a drawback, but it turns into a powerful creature really, really quickly. For only 1 additional mana, turning into a 3/2 unblockable, if you think about that, that's really efficient. Like, a 3/2 unblockable is probably 5 mana, 4 mana in Magic, so you're getting a big discount there. And then a 5/4 unblockable is a super fast clock. Like, that is not many attacks, a Woolly Thoctor that your opponent can't block, and then you get the upside that maybe eventually you draw 3 cards with it and refill your hand. So I think that Surge Engine has potential to be good. My concern with the card for standard, and I don't think this is really going to be a card that sees a ton of play outside of standard, my concern is there's a lot of removal that can kill it. Even after you've leveled it up once, a 3/2 still gets cut down, which is a little scary. So there might be a concern that you like pay 2 to cast it, and then pay 1 to level it up, and then you go to pay 3 to turn it into a 5/4, and your opponent's like 1 mana cut down. Also, like, Volt Surge gets it until you get up to that second level. Braid's always gonna get it, and these are some of the most played spells in our standard format, so there are a lot of answers to this. On the other hand, it's a super powerful effect. I think the place that I want to play it most, as weird as this sounds, is the mono blue deck that we just played for Budget Magic. If you think about that deck, what do you want? You want evasive threats that you can combat research, and you got got tons of ways to protect them for 1 mana, shore ups and slip out the backs, and I feel like Surge Engine is perfect for that deck. You play it and you level it up, you get this unblockable threat that maybe you put your combat research on and turn it into a card advantage engine. If your opponent tries to kill it, well, you protect it with your spells and your counters, and then eventually, if your opponent's not dead by getting beat down by this soon-to-be 5/4 unblockable, well then you can wait until your opponent stepped out and refill your hand and draw more counters and draw more protection with its last ability to close out the game. So at a minimum, I think this is a great mono blue tempo threat, and it might even be better than that because, remember, we're heading into Artifact World. One thing we know about Brothers War is it's all about the artifacts, so I bet there's going to be more artifact synergies to take advantage of this. So I saw some people thinking, this card doesn't look that good. Yeah, there is some concern of how it lines up with removal. That is legit, but I think this has potential to be super powerful and super sweet. We also got Urza's wife, Queen Kayla bin-Kroog, and this is a pretty interesting new legend. It's a 3-mana Boros 2/3. It's a human noble, and then it says pay for, discard your hand, draw that many cards, and then you could choose an artifact or creature with mana value 1, 2, and 3 that you discarded, and return those cards to the battlefield. Only do this as a sorcery. So when you think about what this card does, this is a 3-drop that for 4 mana essentially wheels you. I guess technically it's Tolarian Winsing you. You're not going up cards, you're just refilling your hand. And then from among the cards that you discard, you essentially get a gruesome menagerie that can also hit artifacts, which is a nice little bonus there. The other thing is, you got to consider the mana on this card. It's 4 mana to activate, and if you get back all 3 creatures or artifacts, it's technically a ram spell. You're getting back 6 mana value worth of cards. Even if you don't get a 1-drop, and you only get the 2-drop and the 3-drop, you're still getting 5 mana value worth of cards, and you're refilling your hand along the way. That is very, very strong. Of course, it does seem to not be summoning sick, and you do need to have cards in hand. That's going to be one of the concerns is, this wants you to be in an aggro deck with a lot of low to the ground mana value, so you'll be able to have things that you can get back with its ability. On the other hand, if you're an aggro deck, you might empty your hand too fast and not have a lot of cards to loot away with Queen Kayla, but that's still, I think, a minimal downside. This is really, really powerful if you can make it work. As far as standard is concerned, probably the most likely home is going to be a humans deck. It is a human, so it synergizes with Catilda or whatever. And if you look at the human deck, it's all about these cheap creatures. Like, its curve mostly stops at 3 anyway. You're going to be overflowing with 1, 2, and 3 drops for Queen Kayla to get back. So that seems like a really natural fit there. The same concern from before that, maybe you take and empty your hand too quickly. That is a thing. But I think this is worth mentioning in small numbers. You can also try to build around it. We got like Containment Construct in Standard, where when you discard a card, you can exile it and then play those cards. That's a way you could cast all the cards that you discard with Kayla, except for the ones that you put into play for free. Or if you go back to older formats like Historic or Pioneer, even Modern, you got like Glinthorn Buccaneer, which just damages your opponent whenever you discard a card, or Rael, which wants you to discard cards so you can draw even more cards. So if you want to go deep and build around it, you certainly can, but I don't think that's necessary. Just being the top end in some sort of aggro deck, this is a really sweet way to refill your hand and generate value and even ramp in the best case scenario. The other place I love this card, and really probably its primary home in Standard, you got to play a 3-drop and have it live and not get killed and not get me hooked and not get Liliana'd. Like, that's asking a lot. But the place this is going to shine for sure, and where I really love it, is in Commander. In Commander, if you look at Boros commanders, they really do 3 things. They're either artifact commanders, or like equipment aura style commanders like Wylith, or they're just aggro, flood the board, beat you down commanders. Queen Kayla does something super unique that we haven't seen before. This is, in my opinion, you can play it as like aggro commander if you want to, or it does care about artifacts a little bit. But this is, to me, a Boros Reanimator commander, where you play this, you use its ability to stock your graveyard, and then you invoke Justice things back, Resurrection things back, Ascend from Avernus, Brilliant Restoration, whatever you want to do. So if you want to build a unique take on Boros that isn't just, oh, I put a bunch of equipment on things, or oh, I played a bunch of artifacts, or oh, I attacked with a bunch of creatures, I think that Queen Kayla is the perfect direction to go for your Boros commander deck. So Queen Kayla, I actually kind of love this card. I think this card has some potential in Standard, in Humans in specific, and is definitely going to be super popular in Commander. We also got a new rare land, and it is a good one. Mishra's Foundry. So it's a land, it adds a colorless mana. You can pay 2 to turn it into a 2/2 Assembly Worker artifact creature until end of turn, and then you can pay 1 and tap it to give target attacking Assembly Worker +2/+2 until end of turn. So Mishra's Foundry, it calls back to Mishra's Factory, and honestly, it's a pretty fixed Mishra's Factory when you really think about it. Mishra's Factory, for 1 mana, becomes a 2/2, and then you can just tap it for no mana and give any Assembly Worker +1/+1. So one of the tricks with Mishra's Factory is you turn it into a creature and block, and then tap it to pump itself to turn it into a 3/3 to make it even a better blocker. Mishra's Foundry, Wizards took that aspect away from this one. It only can pump attacking Assembly Workers, so you can't do the defensive pump itself trick. On the other hand, its pumping ability is pretty strong. If you get 2 of these, you can pay 2 to turn 1 on and attack with that, and then you can pay essentially 2 because you got to tap the Foundry itself, but to pump the first attacking one and turn it into a 4/4. So I think this is going to be a Standard staple. It's not Faceless Haven, it's not Mutavault, it's not Mishra's Factory. However, we have 0 playable creature lands in Standard right now, and creature lands are really strong in Standard. Like, you don't have to look back very far to see this. Like, remember the Adventures in the Forgotten Realm creature lands that when they came out, people were kind of like, you know, they're decent, they're okay, they're not bad, they're creature lands. These cards were all over in Standard and see play back to Pioneer and in some cases back to Modern. Mishra's Foundry, there is no way that this card is not going to see a ton of play in Standard just because there's no competition, and even though it's not super efficient and not a Mishra's Factory, that's fine. This is still going to be everywhere, to the point where I'm actually a little bit scared that this card might be too good in Standard. There are just so many homes for this. I think any 2-color deck is going to consider it. Any mono-color deck, like the Delver deck that we played, the mono-blue tempo decks, this is going to be an all-star. The reason I'm scared of it is I feel like this just makes mono-black even better. Mono-black, you can easily slot for this into your deck. I guess it messes with your Invoke Despairs a little bit, but outside of that, this is such an easy inclusion to give your deck a little bit more reach and a little bit more power to close out the game. So Mishra's Foundry, I love the callback to one of the original creatures lands, to Mishra's Factory. Great callback, great flavor, and even though it's not quite as strong as the original, I expect we're going to be seeing a ton of this card in Standard because creature lands are just really powerful. We also got one uncommon from the set, coming in the main set, and also is a game day promo, and that is Recruitment Officer. And normally we don't spend a lot of time on uncommons during spoilers because we got so many rares to talk about, but this one is good enough and playable enough that it deserves a mention. So it's a 1 mana 2/1, so a Savannah Lions, but it's a human soldier, 2 very relevant creature types, and then it says pay 4, including a white. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature mana value 3 or less from among them, put it in your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This card is so incredibly good. When you think about aggro decks and you think about tribal decks like humans or soldiers, you need these 1-drops to get off to fast starts and pressure your opponent and benefit from your lords. However, the problem with cards like Savannah Lions, a 1 mana 2/1, is that they're really bad in the late game. In the late game, you don't want to top deck a 1 mana 2/1. It's just not going to do anything. Recruitment Officer, though, breaks the mold. It's great on turn 1 in your aggro deck or in your tribal deck, and then later on turn 5, turn 7, when you top deck this, it's not the end of the world because you can pay 4 mana and use it as a mana sink to dig and find more powerful creatures. So I think this card has potential to see a ton of play in Standard, just as a generic threat, but also because soldiers, we got Valiant Veteran, we got King Darien, a bunch of support for that tribe. We also were just talking about humans. That's a deck that could certainly use another 1-drop alongside Hopeful Initiate that's seeing play in Standard. So I think that Recruitment Officer just easily slots into both of those decks, and I wouldn't even be surprised if players consider it in humans in older formats. Not in Modern, I don't think it's Modern good, but like historic or Pioneer humans, I think this is in the conversation with Dauntless Bodyguard and Thraben Inspector for a 1-drop that's aggro on turn 1 and then gives you this value in the late game, does something if it comes off the top of the deck later. So I think Recruitment Officer is just a surprisingly good 1-drop, one of the best Savannah Lions we've seen in quite a while, especially for an uncommon. We also got the face cards of the 2 commander decks for Brothers War, and it's Urza and Mishra coming in Old Border. In fact, all of the commander decks this time are old border, every single card in the decks. So Mishra, Eminent One. 5 mana Grixis 5/4 Human Artificer says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of a target non-creature artifact you control, except its name is Mishra's War Form and is a 4/4 construct artifact creature in addition to its other types. It gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So kind of a way to turn your non-creature artifacts into creatures and beat your opponent down with them and then sacrifice them. And then Urza Chief Artificer, 6 mana, 4/5 Human Artificer, except it has affinity for artifact creatures. So if you have 3 artifact creatures, you can cast this for just Esper mana for 3 mana. It gives artifact creatures you control menace, and then at the beginning of your end step, you create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So essentially making a construct or like the original Urza's token. So for me, Mishra's the more interesting of these two commanders for a couple of reasons. Number one is it's a really cool way to build around artifacts that want to be sacrificed. So you turn your non-creature artifacts into creatures, you smash your opponent, and then you gotta sacrifice them. Normally that'd be a downside, but if you play artifacts that want to be going to the graveyard, Ichor Wellspring, for example, when it goes to the graveyard, you draw a card. Ugin's Nexus, when it goes to the graveyard, you get an extra turn. Spine of Ishal, when it goes to the graveyard, it goes back to your hand, you can cast it and blow up something else. Then it actually turns it into an upside, so you can kind of ball lightning these artifacts into your opponent, and then do what you want to do anyway, which is sacrifice them and get them into the graveyard. So he's one of those commanders that's going to make some janky cards that most other decks wouldn't want into all-stars in its deck, and those are my favorite kind of commanders. The other reason Mishra is notable is it's pretty easy to go infinite. The easiest way to go infinite with this Voltaic construct, a 4 mana 2/2 artifact creature. It's a golem and it says pay 2, untap target artifact creature. So normally it's hard to go infinite with because most of the things that make a ton of mana are non-creature artifacts, Gilded Lotus or Basalt Monolith. But if you have a Voltaic construct and use Mishra to turn your Gilded Lotus into a creature, then you can tap your Gilded Lotus for 3 mana, untap it for 2 mana, and just easily make infinite mana. And once you make infinite mana, you can figure out a way to win the game somehow. And this will work with any mana rock that makes at least 3 mana when it taps. You gotta make at least 3 to go infinite, but there's quite a few mana rocks that do that, from Grim Monolith to Basalt Monolith to Gilded Lotus to whatever, like you name it, there's a lot of ways to get this done. So I think that'll be another popular option for Mishra commander decks. As far as Urza Chief Artificer, that's fine. I don't think it's as strong as Modern Horizons Urza, which maybe makes it look a little bit bad, but that's probably a good thing because Urza Lord High Artificer is kind of a hated commander and one of the saltier commanders because of how it plays. But if you want to play like an artifact creature themed deck, Urza's a pretty sweet option to lead it. And we have seen from Urza Lord High Artificer and from Urza Saga in various cards that construct that it makes can actually be super big. If you're playing an artifact deck, yes, this looks like a 6 mana 4/5. They're maybe a little cheaper because of affinity for artifact creatures, but really this is going to be adding a ton of power to the battlefield because that construct can easily be a 10/10 or a 20/20. Like that's stuff that happens all the time with these constructs. So don't sleep on just the raw power this can add to the battlefield thanks to that construct it is making every single turn. So these cards, worth pointing out again, these are the Commander Precon Facecards. We don't have the full list for the Commander decks yet. They're not legal in Standard. You play them in Legacy or Vintage if you want, but really they're Commander cards. The other twist with these Commander decks is they're all Old Border, which means we get some sweet cards coming in Old Border for the first time. Command Tower, Preordained Skull Clamp, Reliquary Tower, and about 196 other cards that we haven't seen yet. Like literally every card in the entire deck is going to be Old Border. So super excited to see Wizards really embracing the Old Border theme. We also got the basics from the Brothers War, and they got a cool like robot theme, big machine theme. You see every single one of them has some big monstrous war machine in them. So we don't really know what that means, but my guess is this is kind of foreshadowing some absolutely huge monstrous artifact creatures that are probably going to be revealed once we get back into spoiler season a month from now. We also got one more thing to mention. We have these special cards coming in the set. We know they're coming in all boosters. We don't really know if these are more like masterpieces where you're going to get them really infrequently, or if they're going to be more like Strixhaven Mystical Archives where you get them all the time. But they are all artifacts coming in Old Borders, so these are cards that are not legal in Standard, being reprinted in this way, not changing their legality. So if it's a card that's only legal in Modern and back, then it's legal in Modern and back, or whatever, just like that. So far we've seen Ivory Tower, Lodestone Golem, Jalem Tome, Wormcoil Engine. You can also say each one has at least 2 art. You have the normal art and then like a blueprint art that's kind of showing how you made the art or showing how you made this big artifact. The most notable thing about this, if you look at the Wormcoils, there's actually 3 versions. You get the normal Wormcoil, you get the blueprint Wormcoil, and then you get a foil numbered Wormcoil. This is the first time that Wizards has ever done this. This is a big thing in sports cards where you have like 1 of 1 cards, 1 of 10. So what this means, looking at the Wormcoil, see the XXX of 500? There are only 500 of those printed. There are 500 of the rainbow foil Wormcoils. That's all that exist. And if you open one in your collector booster, they only come in collector boosters, but if you open one, it's going to have a number on it. It's going to be 1 of 500 or 449 of 500. So it's going to be a very specific one. I think these cards are actually probably going to be kind of expensive. And the other thing to keep in mind, if you decide to open some packs of these cards, the numbers actually do matter. If you look at sports cards, number 1, that's a big one. Everyone wants 1 of 500. That's usually one of the most valuable ones. The other numbers that are usually pretty expensive are the meme numbers, like 69 of 500, 420 of 500. Those usually command a premium over, 336 or whatever, some random number that no one cares about. So really interesting. I've seen some people be a little bit like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I think it's fine. It's basically some special exclusive thing. That's a reprint. It's only in collector boosters. Sure, the 1 of 500 Wormcoil Engine is going to be super expensive, but thankfully, the normal Wormcoil Engine should be pretty cheap. So if there's going to be these super exclusive 1 of whatever versions, I mean, we talked about this on the podcast. Go back to the podcast like a year ago. We were talking about how this was kind of inevitable, and we would get like some 1 of 1 Mark Rosewater's, fingernail clipping card, where you get a piece of his flannel shirt or something, and it's 1 of 1, the only one in existence. We knew it was coming because this is the way of the world with the collectible card world right now. So this is just Magic jumping into the fray, and honestly, as long as it's all reprints and they're not doing this with new cards, I think it's perfectly fine, even though those cards are going to end up expensive. Anyway, those are Brothers War spoilers for today, so let me know what you think. I gotta say, oh my goodness, I was already super hyped for this set. For me, when they announced the sets for this year, it was Dominaria United and Brothers War. Those were the 2 big ones that I was super hyped about. And so far, from what I've seen from this set, old borders everywhere, Urza and Mishra, callbacks to old characters. Every single thing has got my hype level through the roof. I was already a 10 out of 10, and somehow now I'm even higher than that, so I am super excited. More spoilers gonna have to wait. We don't kick off real spoiler season until around MTG Vegas, the end of October, so we're gonna have to wait about a month until we really get spoilers, except for this weekend, apparently. There's an event that Wizards is hosting that might have some spoilers, PulseCon or something, some Hasbro Con, so we'll see more of this at soon. But in the meantime, what do you think? What do you think of Meld returning? What do you think of these new cards? The Commander cards, the Old Border cards, the basic lands? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy it. And I'll be back in, well, I guess about a month with more Brothers War spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, and I will talk to you soon.